A very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Automotive Logistics Supply Chain Hour. And welcome back, I should say, to the Automotive Logistics Supply Chain Hour, to a new season of insights, videos, and data as we take you through the top issues addressing the global automotive industry and supply chain. First of all, I want to thank all of you for taking some time to share your screens with us today. I don't pretend to have your full attention, as I'm sure many of you continue to track the results of the still to be determined US election. But we want to make this worth your while in terms of the insights that we share on global vehicle production forecast data, impacts on the supply chain, and indeed some reflection on what the results, or perhaps even lack of results for now, could and will mean for the automotive industry and indeed for the supply chain. I'll be joined in a little while by Joe McCabe, who leads forecasting at AutoForecast Solutions, and as mentioned, we'll share the most updated forecast that AutoForecast Solution has on the global picture, and we'll zero in on some key topics and issues, including in the US and including some of the global trends that are affecting the industry. I'm Christopher Ludwig. I'm the editor-in-chief here at Automotive Logistics and our other brands at Ultima Media. And again, I hope those of you who joined us for our first season of live streams earlier this spring, summer, and for our Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live global virtual conference in September. It's great to be back on your screens and hearing from you. Don't forget to put your questions and comments through all along the way, and we'll do our best to get to them. So let's turn first, before we turn to Joe, I just want to share some lessons and insights and learnings, if you like, that we've been picking up across our live stream episodes, events, and indeed what we're going to carry into this next set of series on these. So let me start just with I guess a couple of quotes kind of reflecting perhaps seem apt today. As far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain, and as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. So said Albert Einstein. You can make what you will of that. I mean, the tendency to probably draw some conclusions along the lines of election polling, electoral votes, and perhaps even pandemics when we think about the trying to connect mathematics to reality and the lack of certainty there. But for me, I think it also comes down to the supply chain as well, when we think about understanding data, how we use data in the supply chain, learning from it, adding other intelligence to it, anticipating it, and in fact reacting to it. And I think no time like the present in terms of uncertainty is that supply chain data more important. And again, I think we'll touch on some of that later. And a quote from Blaise Pascal: "Il n'est pas certain que tout soit incertain." Nothing, uncertainty is not even certain, we might translate as that. So again, very uncertain times. We can't even count on uncertainty to be certain. And again, today of all days tells us a lot about that. So I want to take that theme, if you like, of uncertainty in the automotive supply chains in an age of uncertainty. That in some ways I think will characterize a lot of what we talk and touch upon, not only today in our opening episode, but indeed in many other topics that we'll be covering across the season, and indeed across our automotive logistics, whether we're talking about the impact of the coronavirus, and indeed here in the UK and other countries in Europe, as many of you of course know, we're moving back into lockdowns and other restrictions. What is that going to mean for the automotive supply chain? What does it mean for production, sales, and indeed for eventual recovery in a post-COVID world? Of course, the election is going to loom large, not just today, but for likely days to come, and indeed, depending on the result thereafter. Here in Europe as well, obviously, we're managing through, or failing to manage through, lots of uncertainty around Brexit. And a bit closer, within the automotive supply chain, of course, we're under severe cost and capacity pressure. It's having lots of impacts, across the supply base, whether it's at the plant side or logistics suppliers. That's only likely to increase as this uncertainty looms further. And in the meantime, more consolidation, alliances across production, across suppliers, and across OEMs. These are only likely to increase in the face of this uncertainty, and increasing the leverage and scale, and with definitely implications for many across the sector. And when we talk about what global platforms, what's being built where, and sourcing and trade patterns. So What I would also stress in that, though, is that the uncertainty in the supply chain brings a lot of opportunity. And I think uncertainty in some ways is the forte of the supply chain management and logistics sector in terms of managing through it, in terms of leveraging data, systems, technology, whether we're going through network design and other aspects. And I won't name them all, but I think just a few of the many opportunities that we intend to explore, continue to explore in this series and across our content, automotive logistics, and our other brands. So I think, again, in terms of managing through this period, the supply chain will come front and center, just as it has, if you like, throughout this crisis, and we think that's going to continue. But in terms of turning to one key area of uncertainty, and I hope all of you aren't quite sick of voting just yet, because I'd like to get your opinion. There's no question that this is something we'll touch upon a bit later in the show together with Joe. But with these new lockdowns, certainly in Europe, and obviously COVID cases rising in many parts of the world, are we going back into hibernation? Are we looking at another series of automotive lockdowns that will lead to plant closures and other disruptions across the supply chain? So I'd like to ask your opinion. I'm going to launch a poll, and it should be coming at you momentarily. And the question, which I hope you should be able to see, sorry, just in a moment. There we are. What impact will the current wave of coronavirus restrictions in Europe have on automotive production? Do you see they will lead to another round of mass factory shutdowns? Will they lead to lower production but few shutdowns? Or will they have limited impacts on upcoming production volumes? So I can see you're voting now. You're voting in good numbers, actually perhaps record numbers like we've seen in the US. Unfortunately, we couldn't allow any early voting for this one. So I'm just going to give you another 20 seconds or so just before I see the majority of you. I think we're just about at our maximum here, and then I'm going to share it. So I think let me just close the poll. I'm going to close the poll now and reveal the results. And unlike other elections, we're going to be able to share a result with you immediately. And you think overwhelmingly, again, overwhelming is not something that I think is going to characterize other aspects of the supply chain, but overwhelmingly, 66% will lead to lower productions but few shutdowns, whereas quite a minority of you, only 13%, see another round of mass factory shutdowns and fairly limited impacts on upcoming production volume. So I would actually consider that something of a positive, if you like, in terms of how we see that going. And obviously, you don't see that we're going quite back to the future in terms of where we were in March and April, but still, obviously, some impacts and uncertainty to come. Again, before we go to Joe, let's just reflect quickly on some of the things that we learned in earlier live stream discussions. So again, we don't see a big shutdown looming, but nonetheless, it's a period of uncertainty. So looking at what will be key to maintaining a stable supply chain, what did we learn during this last phase of the crisis? And I think one thing that came out very strongly in the conversations we've had with guests on our show and in the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain live conference was that the crisis definitely revealed very strong collaboration in the supply chain, but actually it required huge manual efforts to gain visibility of suppliers and inventory. It wasn't something that everyone necessarily had digitally optimized and a click of a button. It was task force meetings. It was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings per day. It was done with brute force and blood, sweat, and tears. So the question is did we learn anything from that? Are there things that we can learn that we've invested in to go forward in? And that's something that when we spoke with Matthias Braun, at the end of our last season, he talked about how Excel was actually the most important tool that Volkswagen used from a logistics side to manage the crisis, and told us a little about what it meant in managing that and what they learned. I just want to share with you a short video clip on what Matthias had to say about that.
I know that we still have a big lack of information in the whole supply chain. I mean, we are all talking about transparency in the supply chain, and we know how hard it is to assure that even if we have transparency, we don't have the connectivity of the information sometimes, because some are talking in bill of ladings and others are talking in part numbers, and how do you bring those two informations together even if you have the transparency. So I was not surprised about that, but it was great to see how many people asked for new transparency requirements and said, hey, why isn't this possible right now? You have to do something. So it was more like a boost for all the activities that we are having in our mind into life, and that we have created a new demand for that also, and a new mindset also in our top management level, that it's worth investing in something that you don't have a direct payback.
So there we could hear that it was something that actually promoted and prompted more investment, if you like, from Volkswagen's top management to gain the visibility that they didn't have. And I just think that's a very important point for our audience as we go forward in terms of the digital possibilities and the key aspects of visibility going out of it. Another aspect, again, just a last point before I bring Joe on, when we look beyond the crisis again, what are some of the trends we've been picking up? Obviously, we've seen acceleration of EV production in certain parts of the world. We're seeing some key shifts to online vehicle sales and digital service, and that seems something that people are keen to carry forward. When we're talking with supply chain logistics experts, a key topic that comes up is, can the supply chain and the logistics network really keep up with that? And that's going to be especially key, actually, for this audience and many of you. And I just want to again share the comments that we had from Martin Corner, who's the Vice President of Global Supply Chain Logistics at Volvo Cars, who really thinks this is the major topic of the day when it comes to looking ahead beyond COVID. So I just have another really short video clip here, and we'll play that for you now.
These new business models are really exciting. I mean, I think it's a superbly exciting time to work in this industry, but the big challenge on supply chain now is going to be right front and center of the business, because rightly or wrongly, the business can go to a digital future. If we don't adapt our Stone Age platform and execute it, the whole thing collapses. So particularly on vehicle logistics, I think the industry, we really need to aggressively work together to say, how do we build this future? What should the pipelines look like? Where should we have compounds? How do we build the infrastructure? Because it's coming fast, and we can't work as slowly as we've done in the past, when actually at the consumer end of our business, this move to digitalization is going to happen faster than we're ready for. So I think this has become the #1 strategic challenge for automotive logistics, actually, in the short term.
Okay, so there again, you hear just how critical a role the supply chain is set to play as we move into the next phase of development and in and out of the crisis. So those are just some of the insights that we've been picking up as we continue this series. And like I said, the stuff we want to carry going forward. Just before I hand over to Joe, I would just you can keep up with all of this insight on our Spotlight page. This is how we're grouping together our digital content in terms of the Livestream Hour, in terms of our digital events, in terms of our digital editions, podcasts, etc. So yeah, we have the link to this page here. So just keep up with us there. Obviously, register for more upcoming shows, reports, and downloads. And we look forward to continuing to share that insight and to keep hearing from you. So that's, if you like, enough perhaps for me on what we've been covering and tracking and some of the trends up to now. What I'm really excited to do now is introduce Joe McKay, President and CEO of AutoForecast Solutions, to give us a bit of the global story when it comes to what's happening in global vehicle production now. And Joe has 25 years experience in automotive forecasting, so not new to this, although perhaps this is an especially particular time to be doing it. And Joe, I can see you've joining us, I think, from the heart of the storm over there, if you like, in Pennsylvania, I think, where lots of people will be very keen about other things that are happening around you as well. But we're really glad to have you here.
Thank you, Christopher. And I got my tracker right here watching the election results too. So I'm going to keep on looking and see if anything changes in the next 20 minutes that is going to be something we
Absolutely.
need to address.
Yeah, if
And
you
I want to go ahead.
you could let us know, yeah, that's for sure, because you've got my undivided attention. So you know, unlike others, I'm not going to split my screen. So we'll look forward to hearing from you on that.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to everyone see my page now. Christopher,
Yeah,
are we good?
there it is.
Okay, great.
All
Well, I
right.
have thank you. And I thank you everyone for attending. Good morning, good afternoon. Again, Joe McCabe, AutoForecast Solutions. As Christopher said, I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm going to try to tell you a 60-minute story in 20 minutes. So bear with me. It's a lot of data when we talk about global outlooks, but everyone's going to get a copy of this when we're all done. So you don't have to take screenshots or take notes feverishly, and then we'll have a good QA afterwards. So I want to basically get into what we do. We forecast every vehicle built worldwide for the next 8 years. Who builds it, where, when, how many, down to the powertrain detail, the engines, the transmission, the electric motors, the whole alternate propulsion story. This data is updated every single month with a whole new global outlook every single month. And I found it interesting when Christopher put up the videos in the beginning about how Excel is such a key tool, and yet we're looking to get out of the Stone Age. Those are two disparate issues, right? We live in a glacial space of automotive. We plan for vehicles now that are going to be built in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So how do we continue to innovate at the same time? Look at those long lead times, those long contract windows. So we built software to help our supply base to take it to the next level other than Excel to really do the analysis. But I'm going to show you the data we have. We're going to dive deep as much as we can and see what comes out of it. Now, if we talk about the forecast, there are dozens and dozens of issues, empirical issues, subjective, objective issues that go into the forecast. But the ones I want to hone in on the end on this one are the bottom list, this balancing act. How do you constantly minimize risk and maximize opportunity? And how you defend your core operations while still identifying areas for growth? These two have never been more important than there is in a pandemic, right? How do we stay afloat for today, tomorrow, the next 20, next 40, next 60 years? And the problem is a lot of stakeholders in this industry are not just suppliers and manufacturers, it's the whole chain. It's the consumer, it's the whole secondary and tertiary part of the supply chain. It's the governments, it's the jurisdictions, it's the mandates, it's the policies that are driving our current business and our future that we have to constantly stay on top of. And it becomes really tricky when you have to look at all these different areas to sustain your business, grow, and stay competitive. So first the COVID, and a little history lesson. We always use some sort of what we know to help us understand what we should be going after. So let's look at 2009 as a global recession, 60 million units were built. And if we look at that 10-year span to 2019, so all pre-COVID, we say, well, who are the winners and who are the losers? Who are the ones that learned and took a flyer on investing? And obviously China and North America said, look, it's time for us to really grow. China was an emerging market. They were really poised to grow, and they doubled in size in that window. So you say, okay, rising tide raises all boats. Well, not necessarily. Look at South America. South America just can't get out of its own way. Geopolitical issues, economic issues, people strife, labor strife, and they just can't leverage that ability to grow. So now we're at a new bottom. Now we have COVID. Now we're going to restart. The idea is when we look at the same chart 10 years from now, who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers? So how do you make sure that you are investing down the right paths? You're making the right partners, you look at the right investments, and not just doing a shotgun blast and trying to touch everything at the time. So we really want to use history as one of the little barometers that we're always looking about is when do we invest or when do we protect our investments? Anytime there's an outlook that affects it from a pandemic level, we can't just give one number, we give multiple levels. So we do scenario analysis as well. So at first, when COVID kicked in, we were looking, pre-COVID, we were looking at 90 million unit market for global vehicle production, 89.6 million. COVID kicks in and we say, well, what if it's just a blip? What if 4 and 6 weeks is the total net shutdown? And when we talk about the impact analysis, it's about the core volumes that get impacted, the recoverable volumes that get removed and you can then rebuild because the window's shorter. And then the lost volumes means, look, there's no way we can recover that volume. Now we just have to basically move forward. And as we move forward, longer and longer shutdown periods, we find that the blue, the recoverable, gets less and less. This idea of saying, well, because we were shut down for 8 weeks and 12 weeks, doesn't mean we're going to be able to go back and get those volumes. We got to focus on now rebuilding, and it's going to take some time to rebuild. So we look at this as 3 main volumes and based on the shutdowns. Now, those shutdowns we have to look at and say, what are the scenarios that could come out globally? Well, we basically calculated an 8 to 10 week net shutdown impact. That means when a plant goes from 3 shifts to 2 or goes from 3 to 0 because of COVID, when the volume is lost, what is the actual lost volume based on workday misses and workday reductions? So we look at that net week impact. We look at the demand effect, the idea of it's not field of dreams, you build it, they will come. You have to have a consumer that's being economically affected by COVID, that the OEMs want them now buy new vehicles. So you have that push and pull between supply and demand. All the stakeholders, look, we talk about the stakeholders, supply chain, the idea that 1 weak link in this whole supply chain, everything falls apart. And obviously that restarting, that's those fits and starts, the push and pull. The more you turn the lights on and off and on and off, the more devastating it is to the long-term productivity and therefore viability of each company. So we got to look at that. Now, we're looking at basically that 8 to 10. So we're looking at about a 75 to low 70 million unit range in 2020, and then that'll escalate in 2021. And in terms of that net week impact, we already found nearly 11 million units that are going to be unrecoverable because of COVID. Units that basically the plants were shut down, the demand is not there, they're rebuilding, they're restarting, they're not going to get back to those volumes. So now we're at that restart mode. That sets the baseline of eliminated vehicles. Now we have to, how do we turn the machines back on and get people and the consumers back into the shops? Now, if we look at our analysis, like I said, we do the whole globe every single month. Let's look back in January and February, and obviously we were pre-COVID, didn't see any problems. So this is our forecast that has changed every single month with new actuals and new outlook data that are coming in. And right now in North America, we're still shy of 13 million units of production this year when we were nearly 17 million last year. In Europe, we're looking at just under 16 million. That's Western, Eastern Europe combined that we do as 2 separate regions combined. And in Asia Pacific with 90% of the number coming out of China, under 40 million units. So you can see that we're leveling off, more stability in the story. Even though there's this version of 2.0 and 3.0 on the horizon of COVID, we're learning how to deal with it and learning how to move on. So less volatility in those outlooks for the last 4 or 5 months. Okay, so let's dive into global data. And I wanted to just give a brief little understanding what the globe looks like. Obviously, 2020 in every one of these slides is going to be an anomaly slide, and 2021 is going to be a recovery year. So if we look at it by region, we look at the North America, South America, Europe, Asia Pacific, and Middle East Africa, we're going to see that in our horizon, 2027, that we basically are going to get back to normalcy, which is 2017. We're not going to have this hockey stick growth. It's going to constantly grow and grow over time. There's going to be more maturity coming out of China. There's going to be more maturity of emerging markets coming out of this thing. So we're going to get back to a level of stability, but it's not going to be this meteoric rise until potentially, God forbid, another pandemic hits or another recession hits. So these are the numbers we're really seeing, that we are going to see some, obviously, some drops in 20, some softening in 21, and then some recovery path going out. Now, in terms of the players, let's talk about who they are. We look at things at a detail level, but let's look at things from a brand owner level. Now, a brand owner says, I don't care who's building my vehicle. I own that brand. So Volkswagen is the brand owner of all Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, etc., regardless of who's building it. So Volkswagen doesn't build in China, but their partnerships do. So if you look at it from a vehicle manufacturing standpoint, you don't find any data. But if you look at it from a brand owner standpoint, you would find all the Volkswagen vehicles being built in China. And we say, okay, these are the ones that are going to basically every supplier or logistics player, anyone in the stakeholder needs to have some sort of relationship established with them. And the usual suspects bubble to the top, right? Toyota building nearly 11 million units in a given year, Volkswagen, 11 million units, Renault, Nissan, Hyundai, etc. When FCA and PSA finally do their merger, and we just did a white paper on this as well, they're going to be in the top 3 or 4 when it's all said and done, because there's going to be not a lot of overlap. It's going to be basically a setup of good product portfolios added together. But then we say, okay, who are the inductees since 2010? Great Wall, Geely, Tata, SAIC, Subaru. These are Asian-based manufacturers that are building over 1 million units per year. That means The strength they have in the industry, their buying power, supply side, their ability to control certain markets with their product and enter into markets is going to be huge. And in terms of the silver, going to the ones that are nearly a million, Beijing, BYD, Chery, Dongfeng, etc., all Asian-based manufacturers. You know, when I'm in North America, right, and the idea is it's not about if Chinese manufacturers are coming to North America, it's when and how, right? There was a time where we never believed Japanese manufacturers, and therefore they're here. Korean manufacturers, all highly competitive products, so we don't think about their home base anymore. We just see them as a viable product. The Chinese will be coming as manufacturers to China, into North America. It's all about how they're going to get here and when. So let's look a little North America. Again, the blip of 2020, but the telling story is the high water marks here and the outlook. So let's look at 2016 first. In 2016, North America, we built nearly 17.8 million units of light vehicle production. And that diminished over time, but not substantially. And then all of a sudden we have our blip and now we have our growth. So at first glance, say, oh, we got a problem in North America, right? We only get to 16.7 million by 2027. Well, I don't see that as a problem. What's going to happen is now, and we all know this to be the case, better utilization capacity is going to be in the forefront. This idea of having multiple plants running at 70% capacity is an old path, and it's dated. It's not that old GM model where it's going to build a ton of vehicles and that consumers just going to have to buy them. Consumers are more finicky. They're more focused on not necessarily brand loyalty, but what they like, and the competition is ramping up. So you build where you sell. So that's why we saw Ford, FCA, General Motors either get out of the passenger car business or offshore them to markets that are consuming them. Buick being a huge brand in China, but not here in North America anymore. Because this idea of really understanding utilization capacity and better efficiency of your product to run that shareholder value is critical to their bottom line. So when we say we get back to 16.7 million, we think that's a very strong North America market, because now we're going to have better utilization of existing capacity. Yes, we'll have some new players in the alternative propulsion, but they're not going to move the needle as much as Tesla did. Right? But the idea here is that this is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Now, from a logistics standpoint, a supply chain standpoint, you got to really pay attention, because a lot of these vehicles are part of a global platform. And understand that they're not just built here. Other than pickup trucks, every other vehicle in the world, in North America here, is built somewhere else also. And we're going to get into that shortly. Now, the right-hand side, we look at from a ownership perspective, the Detroit 3, the European manufacturers, the Asia-Pacific manufacturers. Who are the ones that move the needle in any given year? Obviously, 2020 is an anomaly. But if we look in the outer years, like 24, 25, 26, it's flat. That's because we have much better utilization of those plants in North America and going into there. So you're going to really see the importance of these plants running, humming at full speed, knowing that their supply chain's got to be spot on, their logistics has to be spot on, their marketing has to be spot on. This is where the competition is really going to get razor thin going forward. If we break North America into the three main countries, US, Mexico, and Canada, the question always comes up, hey, what about Mexico? Mexico's not going away. Mexico is important to the bottom line of all the manufacturers. It's a major player of USMCA. The skilled labor of the Mexican worker is improving. Minimum wage is improving, therefore a middle class is building. Therefore, they're buying the cars that they're actually building, which is an important aspect. They got 44 different free trade agreements globally. So if Mexico has blips in terms of supply or logistics or whatever, that's all they are, is blips. They're not going away. And then we can look at Canada. Canada has been on a decline because their heavy reliance on the Detroit 3 and Asia Pacific manufacturers, that when UAW gets involved saying, hey, we got our hand out over here, we need to invest it here, Canada sometimes is the one that takes on the chin. But now we have the new Unifor agreement, right? The new Unifor agreement saying, look, electrification, we have to change the mix. We have to change the game in Canada. We need to bring more electrified platforms because we have to invest in the future. And when we do that, we'll build a better supply base. And when we do that, we're going to invest other people who want North America are hopefully going to use Canada as their way into North America. We truly believe the Chinese, if they're going to get in North America, they're going to come in through the north. Canada is willing, business open, they want new players, and they want to have less reliance on the Detroit 3 and more reliance on building new brands that are being consumed by the North American consumer. Now, if you look at the product mix in North America, the quick telling story here is passenger cars and crossovers. We've heard it many times. Passenger cars declining, crossovers going up. But the issue here is twofold. Passenger cars not only declined from 4.6 million to 3.8 million in units, but they also declined in market share. While crossovers increased by 6.1 million units to 6.9 and market share. So you see this pulling away. Now, passenger cars, if you're buying a passenger car, you're building you're buying an Asian-based manufacturer and you're buying a European manufacturer. Okay, you're not buying Detroit 3, but Detroit 3 are making their money in the crossovers and pickup trucks. So if we look at the crossovers real quick, everyone's going up in terms of market share. However, the Detroit 3 add 140,000 units, but lose market share. They go from 38% of crossover production to 32% by 2027. I can argue if you build where you sell, the Encore, the Renegade, the EcoSport, not built here in North America, all are selling more than 50,000, even 100,000 units per year in North America. I can argue that these three vehicles may find their way back into the North American space because of that build where you sell mentality and where that whole USMCA controlling it, less reliance on imports and more build where you sell. So these are really important things to take a look at that. Even though that's their bread and butter, they're losing market share going forward. So you got to really pay attention how that needle moves. Now, if we look at production highlights in North America, mid-size pickups obviously are making a resurgence. Ranger, Colorado Canyon, Jeep finally getting to 3-road vehicles with Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. Volkswagen using the Atlas North America as their base of global Atlas production. Tesla, a unicorn. Very important to know that. Not everyone's going to be Tesla. Tesla's a sports car company that just happens to be electrified. We'll get more into that in the Q&A as well about electrification. Import substitution, Mexico not going away, and using North America as a global export hub. We're going to see more and more of that. That's a big player in that is going to be BMW. Spartanburg using that as mostly all of their production globally. So if we look at opportunities, here are the vehicles that are sold here in more than 50,000 per year, but not 100% built here. And you could read this list faster, I can read it to you, but this telling one here is the Mazda CX-5. Mazda CX-5, I'm always shocked that it's not built here. It's Mazda's one of the most important products, one of their highest selling products. It's a crossover, it fits perfectly in the North America space, yet it's not built here. They're all sourced from Japan. Now this new CX-30 out of Mexico would sure might fill that gap, but I'm always looking at their areas where how can these products not be built here? So pay attention. There's room for more products to come here from that for local production. Now, new players. The 6 Chinese manufacturers that we see bubble to the surface all have different strategies. Some have been waiting in the weeds to sort of watch the market, see how it builds. Other like BYD got Warren Buffett to back them. Other players like Geely said, look, we're going to buy Volvo and Lotus. We're going to make a brand new brand called Lynk & Co. We're going to make ourselves focused and buy into something that the North American consumer is going to want to buy into and then leverage that into other brands going forward. But again, it's not if, it is when Chinese manufacturers come into North America. In terms of quick U.S. sales story, 2016 was our high water marks. 19 represented the 5th year of over 17 million. Obviously, pre-COVID, we thought everything was going to be humming at 16.8 million and not. Current target for U.S. is 14.2 million. That's going to bleed into 2021, with the story being that obviously we break this up by passenger car, domestic and imported, and light truck, domestic and imported. We can't tell a story without talking about China. China, high watermark in 17, heavy incentives, heavy push for China to be a global player. Take the incentives away, the market dips. 2020, we're under 22.5 million, and then we see the growth. Now, what's going to happen in 27 is we don't believe in 30 million units in China. We believe what's going to happen is that China's going to force the manufacturer's hand and say, we're a global player. We want you, we're not going to subsidize you if you build 20,000, but we will if you do 40. So now the 20s get together. We're not going to subsidize you if you do 50, but we do have 100. So the 50s and 100, 50s will make 100. You're going to see more and more consolidation in China to be a bigger global player to get the Chinese to incentivize themselves to go out and build an export product. The telling story is on the right-hand side. When I started the story, I said Volkswagen is a brand owner, right? In 2027, 102 brand owners are forecast to be in China. This is an unsustainable market at that level. This is where you're going to see consolidation, making the right partnerships and really building the building blocks for the right people is critical in China. Electrification, a couple eye charts I'm going to show you. The takeaway here is plenty of fuel types still out there. Globally, battery electric vehicles are only 0.03% in 2010, just shy of 2.5% this year, and we're not going to crest we're at 6.2% by 27. 2027 is 2 life cycles away, right? So you got to look at this thing of innovation. We're not making iPhones, we're making vehicles. And it's really important to understand that electrification is going to be the future. It's not going to be the only future. Same thing with North America, same pathway with 2027 being 6%. You take Tesla out of that mark, it's 1%. So here's why. The blue numbers represent our forecast. Dark blue are the legacy players, GM building Bolts, light blue is Tesla building Model S's, X's, and so on. The dark green and the light green are ones that they add on. This is their plan, right? No self-respecting of EV player is going to say less than 50,000 units per year. And then we have all of the advisory services firm that take a top-down approach and say, well, every fifth vehicle by 2027 is going to be fully electrified. So let's look at this hockey stick. Now, those of us in the industry know this is an unsustainable business model. And this is with battery parity in 2023. But let's pretend that that gray exists in 2 life cycles, that 20 million vehicles are full battery electric. Doesn't that mean 80% still need an internal combustion engine? So, you know, we always take a grain of salt at people saying we're getting out of the internal combustion engine business. Yeah, they might not build new ones, but they're sure as heck going to optimize the ones they have. Now, the real telling story here for any supplier in this business is how they're reconfiguring platforms. In 2017, you could take a platform, rip out the internal combustion engine powertrain, put in an electrified one, doesn't sell, no big deal. Don't build that one anymore. In the future, you have dedicated sleds and skids and skateboards that only can manage an electrified platform. The manufacturer is trying to build a too big to fail mentality with their billions and billions of dollars invested. This is where everything has to hum 100%. The suppliers, the logistics, the materials, everything has to run perfectly for all this stuff to work. And not everyone's going to win. So again, it's really paying attention to how you, as a supplier, are now more and more important to the success of the vehicle manufacturers. So I want to come down to a head, and this idea of NAFTA Plus. Now, NAFTA Plus says, show me a vehicle platform that's built in North America and somewhere else in the world. And I want to pick one, Toyota's NGA. The Toyota NGA platform in 2027 is going to build in every region of the world, nearly 9.5 million units of the same underpinnings. So if you make a mirror, a handle, a headline, or whatever it might be that's common, look at all that opportunity. If you don't get that business, look at all the risk. That risk-reward balance really gets offset. In North America, 2 million in 8 different jurisdictions. Toyota's smart. They build with herself. On the bottom left, 4Runner, Avalon, a new Corolla Cross coming, multiple Lexus with only a Prius and a handful of Lexi coming from outside of North America. But the idea is when you talk to these manufacturers, they are not just supplying in your backyard. They're supplying all over the world. And that supply chain and the logistics, everything has to tie perfectly for a successful global release. Now, if we look at that, we think, well, how many platforms are there? Well, there are 422 platforms in North America, globally in 2027, and 57 are NAFTA Plus. You say, okay, that's not that big deal. It's only 14%. But 12 million units of vehicles built in North America are also built elsewhere. In fact, the only ones not built elsewhere, pickup trucks. And the only thing saving their butt is chicken tax. So there is really a pay attention that this is a global play. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is this architecture. 2 quick slides here. In 2020, this is the top 10 platform architectures, with Volkswagen building the MQB platform of nearly 5.7 million units, representing only 8% of global production. If you bring these top 10 global platforms together, they represent nearly 32% of production. So a third of the market is in 10 platforms globally, with over 50% of it coming from Asia Pacific. Okay, so partnering with these companies is critical. Well, watch how critical it gets in 27. Top 10 platforms, now we're looking at nearly 9 million units in a given platform. 44% of the world is 10 platforms. So making sure that these 10 platforms in the 20 plus and 30 plus countries that they're being managed, humming along at the same pace, at the same efficiency with no disruption, it's going to be a Herculean task for a lot of suppliers to get done. And a lot of logistics companies be done. And the manufacturer is going to consistently push on their supply chain, the stakeholders, to get these things done properly for them. So I appreciate everyone's time today. I know it's a lot to tell in 20 minutes. I'm looking for a spirited Q&A session, and hopefully we learn something and we can continue our conversation.
Thank you so much, Joe. That is, as you said, it's a lot to tell in a short space, but there's no question that we hit on some really interesting topics there. And I've already got some questions from the audience flowing in, and I've certainly got plenty there myself as well. Why don't we start where I'm sure many people's, like I said, minds and attention is nonetheless, is I'm sort of still lingering somewhat today and will be perhaps for several more days and weeks even to come. And that, of course, is the election. I won't ask you to predict the outcome. I think that may even be going beyond the forecasting software skills that you guys have built over there. But in terms of what you see as the critical takeaways for the automotive industry from this election. I mean, I think at this point we can't necessarily say with certainty, obviously, who it's going to be. But what are some of the key things that we might already say we could expect to come in the industry as from where we're going from here?
Yeah, if we look at where we stand right now, regardless of the winner, I agree with you, Christopher, is that there was a big push of saying we see it as a tail wagging the dog. Everyone was saying it's going to be a landslide on a Democratic side. It's not a landslide. So even if Biden wins, we still have a divided nation. Number one. Number two, the Senate's not going to move. Senate's going to stay Republican. So when you have a Democratic president and a Senate that's Republican, not many things are going to get done in a very fast pace. So this idea that if Biden wins, that all of a sudden we're going to get back into Paris, we're going to unring we're going to push down the Section 177, we're going to unring MPG issues, all this other stuff. That's something you cannot turn the needle on in overnight. And so we're going to see a very slow impact, we believe, affecting the North America space. Now, we see more impact potentially opening up more borders and bringing in new products from China and things like that. Yeah, there's a possibility, right? And that's really going to help the logistics or affect the logistics conversation. But we do not see this. We have to scramble the day after the election results come in because there's too many competing factors that are going to take a very long time for things to get done.
No, that is certainly very interesting, and as you say there, I think even if Biden ekes it out, the idea that all of a sudden the China tensions are erased or taken away, or we jump back into Iran deals and stuff, it's probably not on the cards. If Trump pulls it off, do you think that we accelerate in some of the accelerate/decelerate, I suppose, in some of these areas, whether we see more pressure on loosening emissions rules and things like that, perhaps even more uncertainty on the global trade side, or does it equally work that way in terms of perhaps some balancing of what you say is a very split country?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is if there's a Trump pullout here, there's less disruption in the conversation because it's sort of we know what the story is. There's no other ace up his sleeve going, second term, and here comes this brand new regulation that no one saw coming. I mean, he looked at it from a bit, Trump is a businessman first and president second. So he said, look, I'm being told by GM and Ford that the internal combustion engine, I can't get this thing anymore, but it's so efficient right now compared to how it was 30 years ago. That if you tell me to put $10 billion to get 10 more CO2 out of this, a gram CO2, it's going to kill my business. And I know people don't want to have that conversation because it's anti-environment. Every time it comes up, we all want to save the world one car at a time. I get it. But the idea of that there's other ways to improve an internal combustion engine, and you still need a consumer. There's not a line of people out there. Tesla is a unicorn. Tesla took 11 years to make profitability. A traditional manufacturer can't do it. They're vertically integrated. They make two body styles, right? I mean, they have when you talk about electrification, the manufacturing operation is a lot easier when you wrap out all the powertrain, all the regulation, all the fluids. It becomes, quote unquote, easier. And everyone said, well, Tesla can do it. Everyone can do it. And that's not true. I mean, when the Bolt and the Leaf exist, no one's buying them. They're utility-based electrified vehicles. Are they good? Yes. Are they environmentally friendly? Absolutely. We can get a whole side conversation of tailpipe emissions versus the whole supply chain emission story. That's a whole other conversation. But I think my long-winded answer is a Trump win provides less disruption in what the public and the globe is expecting.
So again, very, very interesting there to see how it will come. And of course, recognizing on the EV side of it that we have some let's say, different set of regulatory conditions in other parts of the world, like in Europe, clearly, and in China. You know, we know that in Europe, and there are some cases where selling a loss-making EV will probably result in losing less money than paying the fines after the emission. So the context of that is clearly somewhat different. I guess what I'm interested in, circling that around to the global platform discussion, which I think is really interesting, is if North America does diverge further, or US diverges further from the rest of the world, do you think that impacts on that global linkages to the platform story? In other words, if China and Europe have to accelerate faster in the EV direction and use more pure EV platforms, will that decouple, if you like, aspects of the market and maybe impact the supply chain and some investment decisions that OEMs might make?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, you know, past it was an easier answer. It's just a different company with a different style platform, body on frame or unibody. Now you have these sleds and these skateboards that completely disrupt that market. But the idea is that the volume is still not there, even on a global basis, right? What you're going to see is traditionally how everything works is you want to push your innovations in your marquee product because those people want to be early adopters. Early adopters don't mind spending extra and having potentially things not work. It's the first iPhone, it's the first Apple Watch, it's the first Tesla, right? Hey, I want to be the one that works, that drives this thing around. I want to be the only Tesla on the road. I'm going to pay a premium for that. You know, a Model S came out, I was like, hey, look at this thing, we're going to get it for $60,000. No way, they didn't even make that model, right? That's a second vehicle for people. It's 100,000 unit cost, and it's a fantastic head turner. So what's going to happen is you're going to see the manufacturer, instead of going utility, they're going to go Audi, Porsche, Ferrari. You're going to see all these high-end vehicles, Hummer, $113,000 Hummer that's electrified. It's going to go like stink, right? Fantastic torque, fantastic speed, cool bells and whistles, but they're going to sell 20 of them, right? So in the grand scheme of things, so the idea of this disruption of supply chain, and you couple this idea of 3, 4, 5 years out, we are looking 15, 20 years out, 3, 4, 5 iterations of platform design before we see any kind of tipping point happen in this space. So any respectable supplier and all that, it's going to be sort of prepared. They're going to pay attention. They're going to play safe. They're going to say, yes, they can do it. The other issue is the manufacturers are now just designers, right? They rely everything on their suppliers. You're going to see more contract manufacturing out there. You're going to see more people say, look, I can do every part of the car. Give me that. Give me the ability to do that. And you're going to see GMs and Fords and Chryslers basically being mobility companies, selling services, putting their badge on it, but having the supply base heavy reliance to actually build that vehicle. So that's where your real change is going to be. This idea of quicker innovation, but not just one company looking at it, going to their 400 suppliers going, bring me your A game because now I have to innovate a little better than the other guys.
Interesting there. And I think it's probably worth commenting or perhaps just clarifying on the slide where you showed the top 10 platforms in 27, the huge consolidation, if you like, of whatever it was, 40% of production just on those 10. I'm taking it from that actually relatively few of those, or any of those, are pure, or the skateboard pure EV platforms, because clearly how else would they could never get to that leverage. So although we're seeing a big rush in those platforms, they're not yet going to get the scale. And obviously that raises questions because there's a hell of a lot of investment behind those platforms right now, aren't there?
And we show that to people all the time. Everyone looks at mature markets that want to buy it, but you have emerging markets that don't have infrastructure electrification, right? The cost value, the cost benefit isn't there yet. I'm not anti-EV, but we have to be realistic. I'll give you an example. Back in 2000 and I forget what year, 5, GM said we're going to have 1 million fuel cell vehicles in a row by 2014. Now, as forecast, if we just took that as, oh my gosh, 1 million, we would have missed by just shy of 1 million. Because it just didn't happen. Now, on paper, fuel cell is the best way, right? Using hydrogen, crack it out of water. But there's a consumer out there that says, look, I'm driving a hydrogen bomb. We all know that's not true, but there's an optics issue that they have to get over. Then you have the infrastructure issue. Then you have the cost issue. So you're right, 40% of the whole world is in a non-electrified space, or in an internal combustion engine platform that they'll electrify, 48 volt. Hybrid, plug-in. We can't, when a company comes out and say we're 100% electrified, that's different than 100% electric. right? Electrified is, I'm going to supplement this power with something that's going to help performance and lower fuel economy and therefore emissions. So we always got to pay attention. Yet everyone's going down the electrified space, electrification space and all that, but not full electric, as we like to see. It's going to take a long time to get there.
And that, again, I think we'll go to some audience questions, but I think going down here. There you can see the, some OEMs who are invested obviously in more flexible platforms like BMW, looking to obviously have the 3 different or 4 different powertrains on one platform, often coming down the same line. And when we talk to our supply chain audience, we have to reflect on the complexity that brings, of course, because that actually, we can talk about EV reduction in part numbers and making simplification, but actually there you have a big increase in variety and variation and derivatives, etc. So to your point about the supply chain needing to be really on it and on that, I think that speaks very well to that. I want to call a few audience questions here because picking up on some of these topics. So one question, and since you put his name down here, I'll give a shout out to Michael Labadie from Crane Worldwide. Look forward to seeing you again soon, Michael. I may be early in asking, but is this the current trade climate? In terms of the trade wars and instability, protectionism, is this something that we expect in the long term or something that will stabilize in the near future? Obviously, this is no one can have a perfect answer for this. We touched upon that a bit in the sense that you don't see a big shift in policy that impacts automotive regardless of the outcome that we get tomorrow, in 3-4 days, whenever it might be. Would that be if you wanted to comment further on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're both. We will see stability in this, and it'll be the new norm. I think that's what I see. We still have things that are 60 years old, like the chicken tax I brought up, where pickup trucks, if you try to import a pickup truck to North America, you get dinged with a 25%. We don't see that going away anytime soon because that protects GM, Ford, and Chrysler, right? Other than that, what the real thing that's going to move the needle is consumers have less brand loyalty. Right? You don't have this idea where I'm a Chevy guy through and through, I'm going to keep on buying it. People see what's on the road. They go, hey, that's pretty cool. Let me go test drive it. So that's why companies like Tesla or Rivian or a Lucid or Canoo can come out and say, take a look at what I have. And people might say, that's a head turner. I'm not going to always be loyal to my brand that I've been buying since I was 16 years old. I'm going to constantly look out. And the more the brand loyalty drops, the more you're going to see more production of new vehicles. Now, the question is, are we going to stop the importation of them, or are we going to force those manufacturers to build in North America? And I think that's where the leadership change is going to happen. I think if it's a Trump stay, it's going to say, look, you got to build here. You want to buy your stuff, you got to build it here. The Biden story may change a little bit. He may say, no, we want to be more globally integrated. You can still import those vehicles in. Now, that's going to put more pressure on the domestic manufacturers. And again, it's going to take some time to see the effect of it. But that's just my opinion on a change in leadership, how it may affect the market. But it's going to start with the consumer, what they're willing to buy, and then eventually lead up to how it's going to change the trade balance.
Excellent. So we had another question here. The question is basically, what should be the major focus? In this case, it's referring to finished vehicle logistics, but I might broaden that to the suppliers more broadly in terms of China OEMs. So should they focus more on China OEMs through Canada or the EV evolution? This is the question. Obviously, you highlighted Chinese OEMs coming through Canada there. So in terms of some of the opportunities for suppliers, where might you point them, direct them? In this case, this was finished vehicle logistics that they're referring to. So obviously, the movement of vehicles. But if you have any insights across that.
Yeah, so the traditional market space is when you go to a new market, you try to sell your products there. You try to get to 50,000 units, a certain critical mass to say, now we should build there. So there's no Chinese vehicle manufacturer that's selling anywhere near that number right this second. So I think that Canada is going to be their way of allowing them into the market, maybe making deals with the Chinese government to say, build a product for us. We want a Canadian product here. Start selling it. And then when we start selling, so now you're just shipping product over, vehicles over. Now when you start selling and get the critical mass, now you're in build phase. The thing is though, electrification, you can sort of put a plan up overnight, for lack of a better term, or a tent, as Elon likes to do, right? So, the idea is I have a design, I have my AutoCAD. Look, I just made an electric vehicle. Now let me get some batteries, some motors, some tires, a body, and I have it. So you're going to put a lot of reliance on the supplier going, I have a design, now build this thing. So like suppliers like Magna in Canada are well suited with their Steyr relationship in Austria in Graz, right? They could be a contract manufacturer. They're going to do it. They're doing it with Fisker, right? They're going to do it with Canoo. and you're going to see more of that. So from the logistics side, I think the conversation needs to be talking to the major tiered suppliers in addition to the OEMs, because they're going to give better insight about how much they're contributing, especially to this EV space. So I think Canada's going to say, we want to be the Silicon Valley of the North. The way we're going to do it is we're going to put in electrified infrastructure up here. They have their Project Arrow. They want to build their own Canadian vehicle on only Canadian suppliers and electrify it. So they're going to say, okay, Chinese manufacturer, we're going to be your throughput. And again, this is just my assumption, I'm putting the pieces together. It's going to be an electrified vehicle, and you're going to use us as our way in. So it's going to be both. It's going to be using Canada as the input and using it in the electrification space. It's going to be critical.
So look north, my friends. At this time of instability, we might have some opportunities there. A question, maybe we can start to close around on this. We do have plenty of questions, but we'll try and keep roughly to time. This is a bit about our turnaround COVID. So I think firstly, one part of the question is, if we turn to Europe for a moment, and you saw the results of the poll kind of that I asked our audience, and very overwhelmingly thought, well, actually, no, we're not heading, like I said, back to the future in terms of March, April time, global shutdowns and things like that, slowing in impact. Firstly, how do you sort of see that, your forecast that you shared, the numbers, if I'm not mistaken, I know it's very recent, but I'm not sure if it aligned or accounted for what's happened in the UK, France, Belgium, just in the past couple of days. So how do you see that in the very short term, and then in the slightly longer term? And then if we can circle that on a follow-up to North America, US, in terms of, again, record numbers of cases we're still seeing, might there be prospects of further impacts from this into 21, in terms of how we might see that impacting on that. So you just unpack that for us in 2 minutes. That would be great.
Yeah, okay, here we go. So
more time than that.
Here we go. No, so lower production with fewer shutdowns. Yes, I agree with that answer. I wrote that one down as well. So here's what happened. COVID, everyone's lights were shut off at the same time. Everyone was affected. COVID, we come out of COVID, everyone's got to turn the lights on at the same time. So the suppliers that were not flush with cash, weren't prepared for it, didn't learn from 2009, were in trouble. The ones that said, yep, I'm gonna diversify, I'm gonna look at masks or PPE or whatever it might be, and were able to survive, they were in less trouble. Now we're in COVID. Now we've sort of learned how to deal with it. So all of a sudden, France says, yep, we're gonna shut down our dealerships. That does not mean the suppliers or logistics companies can just shut down too. They have to be sort of waiting in their warehouses and ready to go. So that was that's where the lessons learned from COVID needs to be. Now we're also talking to suppliers. The suppliers are being asked to overbuild, because the manufacturer's going, look, if you're my key supplier and I'm shut down for 2 more weeks for build the vehicle, I still need to stockpile your parts, because when I turn my lights back on, I need to turn them on at 100% production capacity. I can't ramp up anymore. The ramp up is going to kill our business model long term. We can't go to 0 and then ramp to 10, 20, 50, 100. We got to go from 0 to back to 100 overnight. So the reliance they're going to put on the supply chain and the logistics to make sure everything is lined up when they turn the lights on is going to be the most critical thing, we believe, going into this COVID 2.0 or 3.0 or 2.5, whatever we want to call it. So a lot of reliance on that they can't just sit back and say, look, we got sick people too. Sorry, I need you to get my parts, and it's got to be just in time still. I'm not building anything, but I still need it just in time. So when I do start building, you're not my weak link anymore.
Interesting, a very strategic role there, if you like, or it's a tactical role for the supply chain to play. And of course, I did allude to it earlier as well. We'll avoid all the detail, but the big move towards click and collect, contactless delivery is a variety of digital options that we'll see more. That was kind of had a marginal growth in Europe. We saw in the first phase of it. We might see that in a bigger way now in this phase of it, and certainly going forward. In the US, I think we never had a national lockdown. Obviously, lots of stay-at-home orders. So obviously, things work a bit differently. Even in a Biden victory, obviously there's speculation, but probably unlikely of any kind of national lockdown. But nonetheless, how do you see, in your forecasting, are you looking at the potential of another worst case scenario in the US in terms of delay in a vaccine, another kind of vicious wave, and how that might weigh further on the market in the US, North America?
Yeah, I mean, we did see, back to your point of context delivery, things like that, an adaptation of the manufacturers to make sure they can get the product in the pipeline. I'll give you a core one, right? GM has had this massive investment in T1 XX trucks, and they got their K2 XX trucks sitting around. They got to get those things off the lot because now they have to make money on these new, and that's where the bread and butter is in the trucks. And we are seeing inventory reductions at plants because, you know, people went in and got the high content vehicles. So you have all these low content vehicles sitting around that no one wants anymore. They're waiting for the next big thing. I think people are now sort of used to it. And I hate saying it being so cavalier about used to COVID, because it is a global and a pandemic, and it truly is it stinks. But I think people are finding a way around it. It's almost as if I had to equate it to it. You know, there's a time we had a recall for your car, you were upset. Now if you get a car and there's a recall and you don't have a recall, you're going, my letter's coming any day now, because that's the new norm. Get product out as fast as possible. Let be sort of crowdsourcing issue of finding what works. If it doesn't work, we'll fix it after the fact. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of people overbuild. We are going to see a ramp up. Actually, 21, we're getting feedback. We were more in a high 14 million unit range in 21, and a lot of our supply base is looking more, more opportunity. They're looking at mid 15 to high 15 million units, not back to our 17, but they're looking for a faster recovery that we're getting. We were thinking the recovery is going to come in the Q3 of 21, and it looks like we're going to see more of a late Q1, early Q2 recovery with COVID, because people are now finding ways, masks, social distancing, finding ways to work through this problem.
I think that's as positive, I mean, obviously in a very dire situation, but as positive a note that we might kind of leave it there, because obviously with some hope and quicker, faster recovery than we thought. I think the points that made around the overbuild and addressing it through inventory are really interesting, and a reminder of our audience to kind of look for those opportunities and be ready for this recovery and for the shifts and change, because they're happening faster than anyone would have thought. Joe, this has been a great insight for our audience. I want to thank you for sharing all of this. As Joe mentioned, the presentation slides will be made available. Anyone who wants them, we'll make this video on demand, and you can download them there, and we'll make sure that you all get copies of that. And Joe, I want to thank you. We'll let you get back to monitoring the results there and coming out, and I'm sure we'll come back to you soon with some more insights and look forward to sharing more. So thanks again, Joe.
Christopher, thank you very much.
A pleasure. So everyone, thanks again, Joe. So thanks again to all of you for sticking with us. And I know there are a couple other questions and comments that we couldn't get to. We will share them with Joe, and as other questions, perhaps answers that we can get back to you with, we certainly will. That's part of how we like to do it. I want to remind you all, if you enjoyed this, or to keep up with us in our live stream series. You can keep up with anything we're doing on the Spotlight page and through our newsletters. The next show that we have planned is looking specifically at sustainability and getting some opportunities in sustainable packaging. We'll be talking to a number of expert guests there. So we've just put a link through in the chat there to register. Please do register for that as well if you're interested, and we'll be sure to remind you about that. Thanks again to our team here, and if you have ideas, if you're interested in getting involved, please get in touch with myself, my colleagues Nimish Ladva, Richard Logan, across automotive logistics topics, and also manufacturing. We'll also be launching a series of live streams more specific to manufacturing through our publication, Automotive Manufacturing Solutions. So there's plenty to keep up with, not just in geopolitics or in elections. So with that, I will let you all get back to tensely watching all the results. We'll have this available on demand. Keep with us, stay safe, stay sane, and we'll see you really soon. Thanks again.